company is Clustrix. I'm Paul. I think I need a clicker, because otherwise, okay. All right, so this is from this Bank of America Merrill Lynch report that came out earlier in the year. Big data drives database demand acceleration. Maybe everybody in this room already understands this. But the interesting thing about this presentation was all of the reasons that they list for why big data is driving database demand is exactly the reason why we started Clustrix. Social networking, social media, rapidly expanding, user-generated content. So it's about people producing content not only on their own, but about each other and about their contacts with other people. Smartphones, mobile devices, sensors, RFID. So it's about a plurality of modality of devices, right? All producing different relational information about people and the relationships driving big data. And this is why we started Clustrix. So Clustrix is really the only scalable, fully relational, fully SQL, fully ACID OLTP database system. And what's different about what we built at Clustrix over everything else in the world is on this slide. So we have our SQL interface at the very top. SQL queries come in, and then we take queries and compile them into little individual query fragments, and those are run in parallel across the nodes in the cluster, in the Clustrix system. So what's going on here is we're really bringing MPP to the OLTP relational database for the first time, so massively parallel processing. And what this means is now you can completely scale out. You have a completely scale out architecture for real relational ACID SQL OLTP. So when people say SQL doesn't scale, that used to be true. The reality was the SQL implementations that were out there didn't scale. The things we built at Clustrix are fundamentally different. And it's completely shared nothing, scale out. Okay? So what does this mean? Well, MPP, OLTP, as I said, complete scale, just keep adding nodes, linear scalability. There are no bottlenecks in the system. It's not a shared locking architecture or a shared caching architecture like what something like Oracle RAC tries to do. It's completely scalable. And so why do people use Clustrix? Well, scalability is the first thing. That's what I've been talking a lot about. But because it is a cluster, fault tolerance is one of our key principles in the architecture. So anything fails in the system, the cluster keeps running. No issues. The application doesn't notice. The administrator doesn't notice. The app keeps running. And then finally, of course, ease of use. So how do you deploy Clustrix? Well, we sell appliances. So you just drop more nodes into the cluster, plug them in, turn them on, say join cluster. Cluster expands. We redistribute the data on the back end to make sure everything's evenly distributed. Load is spread across the cluster, but again, to the outside world, it looks just like a single instance SQL database. No need to change the application at all. We do speak the MySQL protocol. So if you have a MySQL application, it plugs right in. So if it's PHP or JDBC or anything like that, or even if you're just coding, raw C directly through the lib MySQL client, all that stuff just directly works. So no storage configuration, drivers, kernel versions to manage, just more nodes, add them to the cluster and it grows. Database scaling. So luckily, Slava and Barry set this up already, so maybe we don't need to go through this a lot, but the biggest problem with sharding, biggest problem with scaling relational databases, rather, has been sharding. And you see this big, giant red box of stuff that you have to do if you wind up sharding your database. This is information and relational semantics being pushed up, the responsibility for that being pushed up into the application. Now the application developers have to deal with that in the sharding layer. Versus Clustrix, all of that problem just goes away. You don't have to change the app. You don't have to change how you're doing things. You don't have to try and figure out if I want to use NoSQL or what am I going to do. Just you can continue with SQL and you don't have any problems. So this is what I was describing before about the failure of some of these other systems like Oracle RAC, where they use a shared storage infrastructure to do things like locking, distributed locking, and cache management. The system just kind of winds up collapsing. We've spoken with a number of people, you guys probably all have too, who've tried to scale RAC, seen the failures with RAC, and it's because it's not fundamentally MPP. So you really do need a system like what we've built from the ground up to be truly parallel and truly distributed to get horizontal scalability. So in the market, it's exactly as I think Barry was saying, right? So we've got these SQL databases that have this functionality but don't scale. And then we've got NoSQL that was supposed to be a reaction to that, right? So what happens if we rip out all of the relational functionality and make something that's just essentially a distributed hash table, and now we think we can scale that. And it's, maybe it's Mongo, maybe it's Cassandra. The names change all the time. Part of that is because the technology is relatively light, right? There's not that much there. We did look at some of the interesting things that things like Mongo were doing, where they have a native JSON data type with ad hoc properties. We've actually built that same thing into Clustrix. So you can actually use Clustrix as a document store. It has a native JSON data type. You can do ad hoc properties on columns. This is something we're just coming out with right now. So it really is full features, full functionality, full SQL, completely scalable, okay? No bottlenecks, completely fault tolerant. Some of our customers, everybody on this list has purchased, and then within 1 or 2 quarters purchased again, and then within 1 or 2 quarters purchased again. It's just so easy to scale with Clustrix. No need to really do anything other than watch your load. Some quotes here, and I'll just talk quickly about who we are. So I'm Paul Mike, still CEO and founder. Before Clustrix, I founded a company called Isilon Systems, massive scalable file system. So I've gone from scaling unstructured data to scaling structured data. Some of the same people from the same team, so we really know what we're doing, and I think my time's up. Thanks.